You know the movie. It's a classic. A technicolor dream of ruby slippers, yellow brick roads, and lions, tigers, and bears. But for decades, there's been this chilling rumor. A rumor that suggests hiding in plain sight, right there in the whimsical land of Oz, is a real-life tragedy. So, let's get into it.
This is the question, isn't it? It's the one that has haunted generations of fans, passed down like a ghost story from old VHS tapes to early internet forums. I mean, the whole idea is just so shocking, so completely out of place in a movie that's all about joy. It makes you wonder, could it actually be true? Okay, so the moment we're talking about happens right after our heroes meet the Tin Man. They're all super happy, singing, "We're off to see the wizard," and skipping through this painted forest. It's pure, innocent, feel-good movie magic. But the legend says, if you look really, really closely in the background, you'll see something truly horrifying. And there it is, the urban legend in all its gruesome detail. The story goes that one of the actors who played a Munchkin, for some reason, hanged themselves from one of the prop trees, and the cameras just kept rolling. People swear they've seen it. They describe this dark, dangling shape that, once you see it, you just can't unsee. It's a terrifying story, for sure. But is it real? To find out, we have to separate the creepy myth from what was actually happening on that set, which honestly is pretty strange in its own right. So let's look at the evidence together. All right, here's the big reveal. That thing you think you're seeing in the background? It isn't a person. The official explanation from MGM, the studio, is that the mysterious shape is actually a large bird, a crane, to be exact, just flapping its wings in the distance. I know, right? It sounds almost as weird as the myth itself. So you're probably asking, why in the world would there be a crane on an indoor soundstage? Well, to make the painted forest feel more alive and real, the studio actually borrowed a bunch of exotic birds from the Los Angeles Zoo and just let them wander around the set. If you look closely in other scenes, you can totally spot peacocks and other birds just milling about. And you know, beyond the whole bird explanation, the suicide theory just falls apart when you think about it logically. First off, movie sets that are supposed to look like huge forests, they're often surprisingly small and cramped. There would have been dozens of crew members standing just off camera. There's no way nobody would have noticed. And second, those trees weren't real. They were props made of stuff like foam and wire that would have just collapsed under the weight of a person. So why do so many people insist they saw a body? Well, here's the kicker. Years ago, somebody actually altered the footage to make that bird shape look bigger, darker, and way more human. They posted this fake clip online, claimed it was from an original, unedited VHS tape, and boom, the rumor just exploded. That fake clip is what most people are actually remembering. Okay, so the hanging Munchkin is a total myth. But it's not the only dark rumor to come out of Munchkinland. Oh no, the stories about how the actors who played the Munchkins behaved off-screen are just as legendary. The stories are pretty wild. I mean, they paint this picture of absolute debauchery. We're talking drunken orgies, totally trashed hotel rooms, just general chaos. The most famous story of all is that the actors were so out of control that the studio had to call the police, who supposedly had to round them up using butterfly nets. And get this, the rumor was actually fueled by a pretty surprising source, Judy Garland herself. She told that butterfly net story in an interview years later. But, and this is important, she was almost certainly joking. And given her own very complicated and difficult history with the studio, she wasn't always the most reliable narrator of what went on. The truth, as it usually is so much more complicated. And honestly, a lot sadder than all those sensational rumors. To really get what was happening, you have to understand who these actors were and the conditions they were forced to work in. So most of the 124 little people hired to play the Munchkins were part of this European performance troupe run by a guy named Leo Singer. He was their manager, but he was incredibly exploitative. He handled all their contracts, and since most of them didn't even speak English, they were completely at his mercy. So Singer paid his actors about $50 a week, $50, for these incredibly long, grueling days on a major Hollywood movie set. And even then, he would often keep a huge chunk of that money for himself. Now, to put that $50 into perspective, listen to this. Toto the dog's trainer was making $125 a week. The studio was literally paying more to manage the dog than they were to many of the human actors. It's just awful.
Their living conditions were just as bad. They were all crammed into these old hotels, with several people sharing a single room. The costumes were ridiculously heavy and itchy, and pretty much impossible to get out of without someone helping you. There's even a story about one actor who fell into a toilet and was stuck there for almost an hour before somebody found him. So, were they a little rowdy sometimes? Yeah, probably. But you have to imagine what this was like for them. For many of these performers, it was the first time in their entire lives they were surrounded by people just like them. That so-called wildness wasn't really debauchery. It was this chaotic, joyful celebration of finally finding a community. So the suicide was a bird, and the orgies were really just an exploited community blowing off some much-needed steam. So why? Why are we so eager to believe the absolute darkest version of the story? What does that say about us? It's definitely not just The Wizard of Oz. There's this whole genre of urban legends that are basically dedicated to ruining our childhoods, right? You've probably heard them. People have claimed to see all kinds of hidden things, from a suggestive shape in The Little Mermaid's wedding scene to a secret word spelled out in the dust in The Lion King. I think ultimately, our love for these myths comes from a very human place. There's this little thrill you get from pulling back the curtain and finding something dark and adult, lurking underneath our most cherished, innocent memories. It makes the world feel a little more complex, and maybe just a little more interesting. The story of Oz really shows how just a few strange facts, a bird on a set, a joke from a movie star, can spin into this huge legend that lasts for generations. It really makes you wonder, what other stories have we all just accepted as true that are just waiting to be explained?